All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. My name is Rich Procida. I'm the founder of the Truth and Democracy Coalition. And what I want to do now, we're going to have a presentation by Professor Joseph Dowd on philosophical therapy for political activists. And but first, I want to tell you a little bit about the Truth and Democracy Coalition, and then tell you about some of our upcoming events. So the Truth and Democracy Coalition was formed to build a pro-democracy movement in America. We educate the public about disinformation, teach people to be critical of the propaganda they consume, and provide critical analysis of current events and social issues. We produce media, educational materials, hold seminars and meetings, work with other organizations, organize events and activity, all geared toward building a pro-democracy movement in America. And the coalition seeks to build communities of people of different faiths and ideologies to defend and promote democracy locally, nationally, and globally. We're going to have our first January 6th Remembrance Event Planning Committee meeting. We put an annual event on here in Whittier, California, in which we raise awareness about what happened on Jan 6, 2021. So that we can keep that in the forefront of people's minds. So we're planning our annual event to remember the attempted coup and the insurrection against the United States Congress. And it's important to remember what happened and to not let the actions of then President Donald Trump and his extremist followers overthrow our government and install Donald Trump as dictator for life. So in order to resist authoritarianism, we must keep the events of January 6th, 2021 at the forefront of people's minds as we head into the 2024 elections, with Donald Trump still the front runner for the Republican nomination, even now. So we're organizing an event in Whittier. We're going to help people organize events in their hometown. So join us by registering at tinyurl.com/Jan6th 2024. My name, Richard Procida. I'm an author, attorney. I wrote a book on global perspectives on social issues about pornography. I'm the leader of the Truth and Democracy Coalition. I'm going to lead a discussion about women, relationships, politics, and life. And we do this on a monthly basis. And this will be our third nonpartisan Red Pill men's group. And women are welcome to attend too, and they do attend. And at this meeting, we're going to begin our book study of The Rational Male by Rollo Tomassi. And we're beginning with the first section of the book, the basics. So to register for that, go to tinyurl.com/redpillmen. And then check out our discussion about what's wrong with men, or part one of that discussion at least. I'm going to be putting out the whole thing in its entirety, the whole hour and a half, but you can check out the first part of that presentation at our YouTube page, and you can get that at youtube.com/@Truth and Democracy Coalition. And when you go there, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our page. So today we have Professor Joseph Dowd, a philosophy instructor at California State University, San Bernardino, and he's going to teach us logic-based therapy and address the need for progressives to reclaim self-improvement. Dr. Dowd is licensed by the National Philosophical Counseling Association as a philosophical consultant. He's a professor of philosophy at Cal State University, San Bernardino. And as a philosophical consultant, what that is basically a therapist who uses philosophical reasoning to address emotional problems. And in this presentation, he's going to explain logic-based therapy and how you can use it in your own life. So it's this LBT, logic-based therapy, is especially useful for people who are involved in politics. It helps to diffuse anger, defensiveness, and other emotions that can cause the political dialogue to degenerate into a shouting match. And with its focus, he's also focused on Asian philosophy, and he's concerned that many left-wing intellectuals have turned against the self-help and wellness industries. So left-wing intellectuals, they make good points when they criticize self-help and awareness and the prosperity gospel and so forth. However, by abandoning self-help and wellness, the left creates a void that's being filled by right-wing intellectuals like Jordan Peterson. And a lot of what we're doing here is to sort of fill those voids so that people don't turn to authoritarianism and don't turn to conservative intellectuals if we leave this opening, this void, is what Professor Dowd calls it. And maybe you can talk a little more about that. But I'd like to introduce Professor Joseph Dowd. Welcome, Joseph.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Rich. Does anyone have any questions? Like, so now I want to kind of, I know some other people have sent like actual emotional struggles that they have, but for now I want to open it up for Q&A, see if anyone has just any questions about LBT or about my claim, which is that progressives need to reclaim self-improvement. So does anyone have any questions?
Well, I have a little question. You know, sometimes, sure. I mean, I recognize that I really wish my mother would have divorced my father much earlier than she did. We had to live with that man and suffer the abuse. Sometimes on the other hand, you do make a mistake, you know, so how does that sort of play into it? Let's say that Tomiko had actually divorced for not very good reasons. How would you deal with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, sometimes you will get a client who actually, like, they have genuinely done something worth feeling bad about. But then it becomes a question of, is there something else wrong with their reasoning? So let's say that Tomiko had I don't know, let's make it even more extreme. Let's say that she, well, we don't have to say Tomiko, but let's say that someone has kids with someone and then she doesn't like the responsibilities of parenthood, so she runs off. Okay, abandons the kids. Okay, and let's say that by now, you know, years have passed, she has, and let's say she's actually done her best to try to reconcile with the kids, to let them know that she did something wrong and to tell them that, well, she would like to be part of their lives if they would have her. But let's say that despite doing those things, she still is racked with guilt over what she did. Well, in that case, I think we want to maybe look at exactly how that person is condemning herself. So, like, remember my former client's emotional reasoning. If I did bad things, then I deserve to suffer forever. So let's say she did something very bad in the past, something that is worth feeling guilty about. But at this point, it's already done. Like, and she's done everything she can to make things right. There's no more that she can do. So there's really no point in her torturing herself anymore. But let's say she continues to torture herself because she feels like she just deserves to suffer. Well, in that case, her emotional reasoning would be something like this. And I would maybe question the rule here. Say, well, you know, again, if someone steals something, would you want them to suffer forever? Right? And that might help relieve some of the urge to just torture herself. Now it gets tricky because there are cases where someone might have done something bad and they still have things that they need to do to make amends. In order to achieve the kind of life or the kind of relationships that they want, they need to make some amends. Well, in that case, it might actually be useful for them to feel some guilt because that guilt might motivate them to do the right thing. And so I'm I want to make it clear. I'm not saying that whenever you feel an unpleasant emotion, you should always try to get rid of it using this method, because it might turn out that the emotion is actually quite justified. I'm just saying that if you are really suffering from an emotion that's really interfering with your ability to live your life, then this is a way you can kind of try to get back on your feet. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, I have a Kimberly Weinstein
Yeah.
in the chat. And if you do want to put your questions in the chat, apparently I'm
Yeah.
able to monitor the chat.
Yes.
So do that too. So she says, how do you put this into play when, for example, you are staffing a booth and some angry conservative person cannot hear what you're saying because they're so angry and making assumptions? So can you use this technique to diffuse this situation?
Not this technique exactly, because this is not meant to be used on another person, like to fix them if they don't want to be fixed, right? This is something you'd use on someone who wants to be fixed. Now, something you could employ parts of this in dealing with, like, say, an angry conservative person who's just not listening to you or is very stuck in their views. You might, for example, be able to recognize some fallacy that they're committing. They might have a world revolves around me attitude, where they think everyone needs to think the same way they do, or they might be oversimplifying reality, or they might be making blind conjectures. And in those cases, there might be ways you could encourage them to adopt the corresponding virtue. So if they're oversimplifying reality or making blind conjectures, you could, you probably don't want to tell them you need to be more objective, because that will just make them angry. But you could, if someone is just making irrational or unfounded claims, then you want to try to be the objective one, right? The worst thing you can do is kind of go to the opposite extreme and start making, generalizations about conservatives and that sort of thing. So you want, if you're dealing with someone who's oversimplifying reality, you want to try as hard as possible to be the almost kind of like Spock-like objective person who is just kind of looking at the facts and presenting them in a kind of a non-combative way. Like, look, would you well, if I told you XYZ, like, would that change your view? Or something like that. So there are pieces of this that you can use when dealing with others, but I think this is more useful if, let's say that you are you just got out of a conversation with an angry conservative guy, and let's say you're feeling really angry. You manage to hold it together during the conversation, but afterwards you're just really just upset. It makes you angry that there's someone out there who thinks that way. This is something you could use on yourself. One thing you might focus on is, so I think if you're getting really upset that there's someone out there who has crazy views, I think you're probably engaging in the world revolves around me thinking, where, their views may genuinely be crazy and irrational, but insisting that everyone be as rational as you, or as rational as you think you are, is just unrealistic, right? You're just not going to find that in reality. And so one thing you could work on is being more empathic, trying to see how someone could come to think that way. That doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but just try to understand how they became like that. And actually understanding that might put you in a better position to change their mind. Yeah, so I hope that was helpful.
Yes.
Kellen says a lot of this feels more about adjusting your way of thinking to manage your emotions more logically. So then you can start acting more logically while still addressing your valid emotions. Yeah, I'd say that's true. So I mean, I listed all 7 steps. I think really what's most useful in LBT, and this can kind of be your takeaway, is this step 1, identifying your emotional reasoning. So what's your emotion? What's the object? What are you feeling the emotion about? So, like, for example, Jerry says, I feel threatened by the US Supreme Court justices. Okay. So the object would be the Supreme Court justices. And the reaction would be a feeling, a feeling of fear or of anxiety, right? Feeling that you are in danger or the country is in danger. Now, that could be a quite justified emotion, right? The problem only would come if you are if it gets to the point where your anxiety is interfering with your life, right? You're just not able to live a normal life. Because look, if politicians, and let's be real, Supreme Court justices are politicians, even though they portray themselves as non-political, they are politicians. Like, the fact that politicians you don't like are in power is a reason for concern, right? It is a reason to be anxious. The problem only comes if the anxiety is interfering with your life. So let's say you're feeling like, if there are these Supreme Court justices, then I need to worry constantly, right? I can't let myself stop worrying, or that means I don't really care. And some people do kind of think that way. Then the report would be, there are these Supreme Court justices, and the conclusion would be, therefore, I need to worry all the time. Well, so there's an obvious problem with that, and I'll tell you what it is. Okay, so the rule is, if there are these Supreme Court justices, or if, fill in the blank, if something bad is happening, then I need to worry all the time. Well, okay, either if something bad is going on, like with the Supreme Court justices, either there's something you can do about it, or there isn't. If there's something you can do about it, then do that, right? Instead of sitting around worrying. Put your energy into actually doing something. If there's nothing you can do about the situation, then worrying is pointless, right? It's actually irrational to worry. So in a sense, I know this is easier said than done, but in a sense, worrying is never really a rational response. Okay.
Well, Galen seems to ask whether this is really only useful on yourself.
Yeah. I think it's okay. So I would not recommend that you try to go through these steps with someone else to help them, unless you are a philosophical consultant, unless you've gotten the training. So I was more thinking of you using it on yourself. Many people get frustrated and upset and angry because of politics. And my thought was that this could be a way for people to help themselves diffuse their own negative emotions. I wasn't really thinking of this as something you would use on someone else. Now, I'm not saying that being familiar with LBT couldn't be helpful when dealing with others. But I wasn't really thinking that you would be using this on someone else.
Now, Rebecca says she feels futility over contacting her representatives in Congress and her senators because they're so biased against her point of view. So
Right.
How can she deal with that?
Well, so you feel futility. So you might, let's call that despair. Okay. So the emotion is despair. The object is that it's unlikely that your like letters or whatever will influence your representatives. Maybe because they have a different political ideology. Okay. And your response is to feel that it's useless. There's no point. So in that case, the rule is, if my representative is unlikely to be influenced by me, then it's useless to try to influence them. The report is I'm unlikely to influence my representative, and the conclusion is therefore it's useless to try to influence them. Okay, well, first of all, we might question the report. I'm not saying that you would your letter by itself is going to change your representative's vote. That's almost certainly not going to happen. But, politicians, what they really care about is getting reelected, right? And so if enough people contact them and urge them to vote a certain way, that might influence them. And so your communication by itself probably isn't going to do anything, but as part of a bigger group, you can probably achieve something. Even if a bunch of people urge the representative to vote a certain way and the representative doesn't end up doing it, still, I mean, let's maybe, I don't know, let's be real cynical and say maybe they're being paid off by lobbyists or something to vote a certain way. So all their constituents' messages aren't changing their vote. Well, still, now they know that a bunch of people want them to vote a certain way. So if the political winds change so that it then becomes maybe more advantageous to them to vote that way, then they won't have any hesitation about voting that way because they'll know that that's what their constituents want. So that's one way to look at it. Another way is, let's look at the rule. If I'm unlikely to influence my representative, then there's no point in trying. Well, you might ask yourself, okay, is that really true? And I guess that would depend on your personal values. I mean, because some people say that, there could be people, let's say Democrats living in a deep red state. They know that their vote isn't going to really do anything, but they still see value in voting because they see it as kind of their civic duty or something. So you might also question the rule. Okay, let's see. Any other questions?
Let's see. Something just came in. It says, yeah, but at Joseph, more than 70% of even Democrats don't want Biden to run again. Yet he says he doesn't care and will run anyway.
Yeah. So, okay. So what you're pointing out is, well, even in cases where a bunch of people want something, it doesn't really seem to change the politician's mind. Okay. Now that's true. I mean, an example I could give you is, did you know that you could fact check me on this? Like, seriously, fact check me. If you look at polling, not only a majority of Americans, but a majority of Republicans think we should raise taxes on the wealthy. Did you know that? Like, a majority of Republicans think that. And yet are the people in Congress, either Republicans or really Democrats for the most part, are they very likely to raise taxes on the wealthy? No. So I understand where you're coming from, that feeling of futility. But again, I would say it's only possible to make a difference if you get enough people on board. I assume many people here are activists. I mean, that's the job of activists. I'm actually not much of an activist myself, but that's a job of activists, to try to get people on your side. You may not, through like writing letters to your senator or whatever, be able to change anything, but by trying to get your message out there, you might change some minds. And if enough people do that and enough people change minds, then and you get enough people who are really who are on your side, then as a group, it could be possible to make change, either by electing new people or through some other means. Oh, how is 70% not enough? Yeah, okay. So, and this goes to another example would be the one I gave, where I said even a majority of Republicans want to raise taxes on the wealthy. Yeah, and you do sometimes wonder, how is that not enough? Well, I'll tell you. I mean, why it doesn't always work out. It's because we vote for representatives. We don't actually vote on policies. The representatives vote on policies. And so what we end up having to do is vote for the representatives we like best. And even if those representatives get in, they may not agree with us on everything. And they might not even agree with us in cases where, 70% or whatever of the people agree with us. And that's an unfortunate feature of representative democracy. I don't know how to fix it. Frankly, I think maybe, well, this is kind of getting off topic, but I think maybe it would be good if we had something like ranked choice voting instead of the winner take all system that we currently have. Personally, I think just reforming the voting system is the only way we'll fix those problems. But again, in order to do that, in order to reform the voting system, you need to get people on board who are going to be on your side on that issue. And so it's still worthwhile to speak out. You might not change your elected representatives, but you might change other people's minds. And by changing other people's minds, you might help to change the system. I want this talk to be as practical and as useful as possible to you. So if I were to leave you with one thing, I would leave you with the current slide that I'm on. Just step one, where you identify the emotion you're struggling with, the object, the reaction, you construct your emotional reasoning. And then what's so useful about that is even forgetting about the other steps, just see if you can find a flaw in that emotional reason. Usually it isn't that hard, right? Like with Tomiko, we saw, there was an obvious problem with her assumption that getting divorced must have been bad, right? And once we laid out the emotional reasoning, it was very easy to see that. So I would leave you with this slide. This is something you can do on your own to deal with your own emotional struggles. And I wish you all the best of luck. I hope you're able to improve your lives with this.
All right. Thank you, Joseph. I wanted to make a couple announcements and then just remind you about and Stephanie, if you're here, if you want to talk about Whittier term limits, you can go ahead and unmute and just give us an update on what's happening if you want to do that. I put in the chat some links to our upcoming events, the Whittier Planning Committee meeting for our Jan 6th event, and to do events on Jan 6th around the country. And then also our nonpartisan Red Pill Men's Group. You can register for that at tinyurl.com/redpillmen, and you can register for the planning committee meeting at tinyurl.com/Jan6-2024. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for participating today. Thank you, Joseph, for preparing this wonderful talk. And
welcome.
And thank you for coming. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
The latest jobs report shows employers added 339,000 jobs last month.
Just blowing through expectations for May.
That is well above even the pace that we had seen in the month of April, which was revised up to 294,000.
The jobs count has now beaten estimates 14 of the last 17 months.
That's the 29th straight month of job growth in America.
There's really no other way to interpret this report as consistent with a labor market which remains incredibly strong. It remains just red hot. It's a great time to be a worker.
This is the kind of report that will likely trigger Joe Biden to take a victory lap.
So we've been averaging, get this, 341,000 jobs every single month for the last 12 months. It's a pretty startling number.
Put simply, I would argue the Biden economic plan is working.